I'm going to be taking a close look in this video of the islands and lands of the South Atlantic and South Indian Oceans, starting with the Brazilian possessions of the Fernando de Noronha Archipelago off the coast of Brazil near Natal, and the Trindade and Martin Vaz Archipelago off the Brazilian coast at Espirito Santo, to the British Overseas Territory of Tristan da Cunha, which today is part of the British Overseas Territory of the South Atlantic, which also includes Ascension Island and St. Helena, to the French southern and Antarctic lands of the Kerguelen Islands, the Crozet Islands, Adelie Land, the French claim on the continent of Antarctica, the Scattered Islands, and the islands of St. Paul and Amsterdam. My name is Michelle Gibson. I did a 23-part series in 2020 called Sacred Geometry, Ley Lines, and Places in Alignment, in which I tracked a long-distance alignment of cities and places that started in San Francisco, from which most of the research in this video came. So far in 2024, I have uploaded the following videos from the original 2020 series. The Ancient Advanced Civilization in Southeast Asia, from Manila in the Philippines to Dhaka in Bangladesh. The Ancient Advanced Civilization in Armenia, Anatolia, and the Aegean Sea. The Ancient Advanced Civilization in the Mediterranean Sea, from the Strait of Messina to Malta. And the Ancient Advanced Civilization in North Africa and the Cape Verde Islands. I have collected a variety of puzzle pieces about different places from the process of tracking cities and places in several different alignments over the years, bringing a bigger picture into focus from this type of geographically focused research that is not immediately apparent on the surface. I am picking up the alignment where it crosses over Fernando de Noronha, the name of the main island and its archipelago, off the coast of Brazil near the city of Natal. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and on at least two other alignments that I know of. The main island has an area of 7.1 square miles, or 18.4 kilometers squared, and the archipelago's total area is 10 square miles, or 26 kilometers squared. So what I found that is really interesting about this place is that in its relatively small area, there were at least 10 star forts here at one time. The largest and best preserved is the Fortaleza Nossa Senhora dos Remedios. The Forte de São José do Moro was the only fort built on a secondary island. It still has imposing ruins. Interesting to note that while the Portuguese word moro translates to hill or mound, there is definitely a more sound contained within it. The Forte de Santa Cruz do Pico was described as a small redoubt, defined as a temporary or supplemental fortification, typically square or polygonal. The Forte de Santo Antonio construction was an irregular four-sided polygon. You can see the Morro do Pico framed through this archway at the Forte de Santo Antonio, like what you see of the winter turret through this arch at Arches National Park in Utah, at the Garden of the Gods in Colorado, at the hole in the wall on Rialto Beach on Washington State's Olympic Peninsula, and at Petra in Jordan. There's no doubt in my mind that these alignments were intentional and not coincidental, and there will be more examples of what appears to be intentional kinds of alignments like these throughout this video. The Forte de Santana was situated over the old harbor in the Vila dos Remedios. Ruins of the Forte de Nossa Senhora da Conceição are visible in the vegetation. This is an old map of the Forte de São Pedro do Boldro. People come to the lookout Fort Boldro for sunsets. There is a good view from the lookout Fort Boldro of the Two Brothers Rock, which appears to be in alignment with the sun. Like Keyhole Rock at Pfeiffer Beach at Big Sur in California, where the light comes through the Keyhole Arch perfectly during the winter solstice time of year in December and January. A solar alignment at Monument Rock's National Natural Landmark, otherwise known as the Chalk Pyramids, in Gove County, Kansas. At Mesa Arch in Canyonlands National Park in Utah, and at Dirtle Door near Lulworth, England in Dorset during the winter solstice period. Back on Fernando de Noronha, there was also the Forte de São Bautista dos Ormaios, the Forte de San Joaquim do Sueste, and lastly the Forte do Bom Jesus do Lau. It is interesting to note that two other places with a high concentration of star forts like Fernando de Noronha, one being Bermuda in the North Atlantic Ocean, another being at Alderney in the Channel Islands off the coast of France in the English Channel. are in a linear geometric relationship to each other. I typically find star forts in pairs and clusters on alignments all over the Earth, and believe they were not military in nature, as we have been taught. I think they functioned as part of the electrical circuitry of the Earth's worldwide grid system. One of the definitions of the word battery is a device that produces electricity that may have several primary or secondary cells arranged in parallel or series, as well as a battery source of energy which provides a push or a voltage of energy to get the current flowing in a circuit. We are told that these Brazilian islands were named after a wealthy Portuguese merchant, Fernando de Noronha, who was granted the first captaincy of the islands of São da Quaresma. He was the financier and organizer of a private commercial expedition to exploit Brazil wood from new lands to the crown, and the flagship of the expedition he organized to do this hit a reef near the island in 1503 and had to be salvaged. There was an island named Quaresma in the cartographic record, showing up in a map called the Cantino Planisphere, said to have been completed by an anonymous Portuguese cartographer before 1502. A planisphere is defined as a map formed by the projection of a sphere or part of a sphere on a plane. There are a couple of things I would like to point out about the Cantino Planisphere. The first is that the Earth's ley lines appear on it, which also appear on the Catalan Atlas of the Majorcan Cartographic School. The Catalan Atlas is considered the most important map of the medieval period in the Catalan language, dated to 1375. This is a depiction of the Iberian Peninsula, with Madrid in its center. The Catalan Atlas altogether has 6 vellum leaves, with each being 26 inches or 65 centimeters by 20 inches or 50 centimeters in size. Each leaf includes the mapping of the geometric lines and shapes that you see depicted here. It would seem that the Earth's ley lines started to disappear from maps in the 1500s, when Gerardus Mercator, a Flemish geographer, cartographer, and cosmographer, published a world map in 1569 that was considered to be the first where sailing courses on the sphere were mapped to the plane map, allowing for correction of the chart to be more useful for sailors. Here's a close-up section of the 1569 map showing the depiction of straight ley lines in the seas, but not on land and sea as were present on the flat projections of the Cantino Planisphere and the Catalan Atlas. Not only that, Mercator was also a globe maker, like this one from 1541. So Mercator was said to have made a revolutionary flat projection map that corrected the chart for sailors. And the Earth as a globe as well? That's interesting, because of another thing that was happening in our historical narrative shortly thereafter. In May of 1543, the work on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres of Nicholas Copernicus was published, offering mathematical arguments for the heliocentric or sun-centered universe, and denying the geocentric model of the Earth-centered universe of Ptolemy, which the heliocentric model superseded, meaning that while once widely accepted, current science considered the geocentric model inadequate. History has it recorded that Copernicus had been seized with apoplexy and paralysis at the end of 1542, and that he died on the day he saw the final printed pages of his work, allowing him to say farewell to his life's work. I think it's important to include some information here about different concepts of space and time. The study of geodesy is the science of accurately measuring and understanding the Earth's shape, orientation in space, and gravitational field. A geographic coordinate system enables every location on Earth to be specified by a set of numbers, letters, and symbols, where one of the numbers represents a vertical position and the horizontal position from the east-west lines of longitude. What we are told is that in cartography, the science of map making, a map projection is the way of flattening the globe's surface onto a plane in order to make it into a map, which requires a systematic transformation of the latitudes and longitudes of locations from the surface of the globe into locations on a plane. But what if the same process is actually happening in reverse for the tools we have available to us in our world, and that the Earth's surface has been projected from a plane in order to make it into a globe shape by the use of the very same geographic coordinate system, and that it's exactly the same information in a different projection? After all, one definition of the word coordinate is to bring different elements into a relationship that will ensure efficiency or harmony, and another definition of the same spelling, coordinate, is a group of numbers used to indicate the position of a point, line, or plane. The only tools that I am aware of that we have available to us to work with to precisely determine where everything is on the Earth and ourselves in relationship to it are tools like GPS, Google Earth, and Google Maps. We wouldn't be able to use GPS efficiently and harmoniously in our everyday lives to get from point A to point B if it wasn't based on accurate information, even if they are still pushing the globe narrative with all of this. So do I believe we have been lied to about the shape of the Earth? Absolutely. I think they have lied to us about a lot more than that. But it also stands to reason that whatever navigational system and accompanying tools we have been given to use in today's world has to be based on accurate information, or none of the systems in place in our world would work. Exactly the same locations on the Earth, but in different projections. Not only that, the Great Pyramid of Giza, which is located at the center of the Earth's landmass, was the prime meridian, until the prime meridian was moved in 1851 to the Royal Observatory of Greenwich in London by the British Astronomer Royal at the time, Sir George Bedell Airy. Carl Monk deciphered a shared mathematical code in his book and YouTube video series called The Code, related to the Great Pyramid and the dimensions of the architecture of sacred sites all over the Earth, one which encodes longitude and latitude of each that cross-reference other sites. He shows that this pyramid code is clearly sophisticated and intentional, and perfectly aligned over long distances. So getting back to what I was saying, ley lines were included on earlier maps and then started to disappear on Mercator's projections, who also happened to be a globe maker, around the same time that the work of Copernicus was published in 1543, enshrining in science the model of the heliocentric universe and supplanting the geocentric universe of Ptolemy. Here's a close-up of the region on the Cantino planosphere, depicting Quaresma off the coast of Brazil, shown by the lower arrow, and the upper arrow points to the Cape Verde Islands at the center of a circle with multiple radial lines and sectors emanating from it. This would indicate to me that the Cape Verde Islands off the west coast of Africa near Mauritania were an important location on the Earth's geometric ley line system. I found a similar geometric place of importance on the Catalan Atlas, centered in the city of Gijón, the largest city of Asturias in northern Spain, and port on the Bay of Biscay. I have placed a modern map of Spain on the left, with the city of Gijón circled, because the circle with 16 sectors depicted in the Catalan Atlas on the right appears to center on the city of Gijón. It indicates a past importance to Gijón that is no longer recognized. The next location on the alignment I am tracking in this video is the Trinidade and Martin Vaz Archipelago, located in the southern Atlantic Ocean, 680 miles or 1,100 kilometers east of the coast of Espirito Santo, Brazil, which it is part of. This group of islands has a total area of 4 miles or 10.4 kilometers and a population of 32 Brazilian Navy personnel. They were said to have been discovered by the Portuguese in 1502 and, along with Brazil, became part of the Portuguese Empire until 1822, the year Brazil became independent from Portugal. Trindade, also known as Trinidad, is the largest island. Many military and scientific expeditions from Europe and North America visited the islands. For example, another British astronomer royal, Edmund Halley, for whom Halley's Comet was named, was said to have taken possession of the islands on behalf of the British monarchy in 1700. At least one visitor to these islands was a fortune seeker. We are told that in 1893, James Hardin Hickey, a French-American newspaper editor, author, and adventurer, born in San Francisco in 1854, proclaimed himself James I, Prince of Trinidad in the South Atlantic Ocean. The British occupied what they called South Trinidad in 1895 and 1896, until an agreement was reached with Brazil. Since there is relatively little in the written historical record about this place, I am going to point out some things about the island's topography that drew my attention. The first are the pyramidal peaks on display in this photo near the island's shore on the left. The tall pointed peak in the foreground reminds me of Shiprock in Sedona, Arizona, on the right. The second are the shapes of the shoreline and coves on the island of Trindade, which are quite similar in appearance to the coastline of an island in the Caribbean, the northern 60% of which is governed as a collectivity of France called Saint Martin, and the southern 40% is governed by the Netherlands and called Saint Martin. as well as that of Casco Cove on the near island of Attu, the furthest west of Alaska's Aleutian Islands in the Bering Sea on the top left, and the same double beachhead configurations can be found at Halawa Bay on the Hawaiian island of Molokai on the top right, and there are many similar beachheads on the island of Chichijima, one of Japan's subtropical Bonin Islands, like Miyanohama Beach on the bottom left and Hatsunora Bay on the bottom right. We are also told that until 1850, 85% of this island was covered by a forest of Colubrina grandulosa trees, after which time the indiscriminate cutting of trees and the introduction of non-native animals led to an extinction of the trees that were once there, and causing a heavy erosion throughout the island. The other islands of this archipelago, the islands of Martin Vaz, consist of 4 islands: North Island, Crack Island, Needle Rock, and South Island. Have you ever heard of these places? I sure hadn't before I started tracking these alignments, and these island groups I am covering in this video show up on more than one alignment. The next place we come to tracking this alignment is today's British Overseas Territory of the South Atlantic, which consists of 3 remote islands: Ascension Island, St. Helena, and Tristan da Cunha. Besides being a British colonial outpost, Ascension Island has a U.S. military air base, satellite and submarine tracking stations, a BBC transmitter, and a listening post run by GCHQ's Composite Signals Organization. Ascension Island's residents have been squeezed out for over 100 years. Also, I first found the location of Ascension Island on a major alignment emanating off of the North American star tetrahedron, where one of the lines extending from Merida, Mexico, crosses right over Ascension Island, which is the only tiny speck of land in this part of the Atlantic Ocean. Next, the island of St. Helena. St. Helena was where Napoleon lived in exile in our historical narrative from 1815 until his death in 1821. Other noteworthy things about St. Helena that I have found in my research include: a 2-car inclined railway to carry cargo was said to have been constructed in 1829 between the island's main settlement of Jamestown and the Ladder Tree Fort at the top. We are told it was powered by a team of 3 donkeys that rotated around a capstan connected to the cars by iron chain and pulleys. Inclined railways typically worked like an obliquely angled elevator, in which cables attached to a pulley system raised and lowered the cars along the grade by way of pairing 2 cars at opposite ends that act as each other's counterweight. As such, there's no need for traction between the wheels and the rails, and thereby allowing them to scale steep slopes, unlike traditional rail cars. Thing is, there used to be a lot more of them than there are now, and inclined railways were a worldwide thing. What we are told about this particular one on St. Helena is that in 1871, termite damage to the wooden ties of the railway led to the Royal Engineers removing the cars, rails, and associated machinery of the inclined railway, and today it is a staircase known as Jacob's Ladder. Jacob's Ladder leads to the historic location of the Ladder Hill Fort and the present-day neighborhood of Half Tree Hollow. Are they telling us something without telling us they are telling us here? Like that maybe perhaps St. Helena was a former giant tree location? When I originally did the research in 2020 tracking the alignment through the South Atlantic and South Indian Oceans, I did not have an awareness of the former giant trees of our world. I came into this understanding in April of 2023 in my first conversation with Chad of the Deeper Conversation with Chad YouTube channel about giant trees, where in the course of our conversation, coming from different perspectives, we found common ground upon which our ideas merged together. Then in October of 2023, Chad and I had a deeper conversation on giant trees, the Earth's grid, and the New World Order. In this conversation, we discussed in depth the idea that the European colonizers were going after all these little islands, and many others as well, in a post-cataclysmic world that were once the locations of giant trees. There is one last thing I want to mention about St. Helena before I move on to the next place. The currency commissioners of St. Helena produce commemorative coins. In past research, I found this 10-ounce of silver piece that was minted on St. Helena in 2021, commemorating the East India Company. Interesting that not only was it in honor of the East India Company, it also shows ley lines on it. The next place on the alignment is the British island group of Tristan da Cunha, named for Portuguese explorer Tristan da Cunha, who was credited for its discovery in 1506. He was said to have been born in 1460 and died in 1540. I find it interesting to note that this Portuguese explorer with an island group named after him was an almost exact contemporary of the previously mentioned Portuguese explorer with an island group named after him, Fernando de Noronha, who was born in 1470 and also died in 1540. Tristan da Cunha is home to British citizens living in the world's most isolated settlement. The main settlement of the main island of Tristan da Cunha is Edinburgh of the Seven Seas, which is located on the only inhabited island here, with ship or boat being the only way to travel in or out on a 6-day journey to or from Cape Town in South Africa. It was named in 1867 in honor of the visit of Prince Albert, the Duke of Edinburgh, the second son of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. It has approximately 250 permanent inhabitants in the present day. We are told that the first undisputed landing was the Dutch East India Company ship Heemstede on February 7th of 1643, and that the Dutch made 4 more stops there in the next 25 years, making the first rough charts of the islands in 1656. Tristan da Cunha was favorably located on the world's historic shipping lanes between the west and the east. The islands of Tristan da Cunha were annexed by the United Kingdom in 1816, making them a dependency of the Cape Colony in South Africa, for the stated reasons of preventing the island's use as a base for any attempt to free Napoleon Bonaparte from his prison on St. Helena, and for preventing the United States from using the island as a base for naval cruisers. While possession was abandoned by the United Kingdom in 1817, a garrison of British Marines stayed and formed the nucleus of a permanent population, which gradually grew and was once a stopping point for lengthy sea voyages until the time of the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869. It eventually became a dependency of the British Crown in October of 1875. In January of 1938, Britain declared Tristan da Cunha a dependency of St. Helena, and at that time created the British Crown colony of St. Helena and Dependencies. Then shortly afterwards, Tristan da Cunha was commissioned as a stone frigate, meaning a naval establishment on land, and used as a secret signals intelligence station to monitor Nazi U-boats and shipping movements in the South Atlantic Ocean. As seen on this stamp for the island, the Donatar Castle was an ocean liner, said to have had its keel laid down in 1936 for Cape Town service, launched in 1936 and retired in 2002, operating for 66 years. In 1942, the Donatar Castle was seconded for a special assignment and was used to sail on the top-secret mission of erecting the meteorological and wireless radio station on Tristan da Cunha, used for this secret intelligence collection. I can also make a circumstantial case that the islands I have talked about thus far in this video have an octagonal geometric relationship between each other. I found a map showing the relationship in red of an equilateral triangle between the Trindade and Martin Vaz Islands, Tristan da Cunha, and St. Helena. I added Fernando de Noronha in blue to Trindade and Martin Vaz and St. Helena to form an octagon, with Ascension Island off the right side of the upper triangle. Next on the alignment, we enter into lands claimed by the French colonizers. The French southern and Antarctic lands have been an overseas territory of France since 1955. They consist of the Crozet Islands, a group in the southern Indian Ocean south of Madagascar; Adelie Land, the French claim on the continent of Antarctica; the Kerguelen Islands, volcanic islands in the southern Indian Ocean southeast of Africa, approximately equidistant between Africa, Antarctica, and Australia; St. Paul and Amsterdam Islands, a group to the north of Kerguelen; and the Scattered Islands, a group of dispersed islands around the coast of Madagascar, of which the principal station for these islands is on Tromelin Island. The French Austral lands and seas were inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site on July 5th of 2019. The French southern and Antarctic lands are administered by a prefect with headquarters in St. Pierre on Reunion Island. I'm going to spend some time looking into the life and voyages of Jules Dumont d'Urville because I believe his story is important to understanding the historical narrative we have been taught. Early in his naval exploration career, as a result of being in the right place at the right time on a naval hydrological survey of the Greek islands and the Aegean Sea, Dumont d'Urville was given the credit and a knighthood in the Legion of Honor for ultimately enabling the famous Venus de Milo marble statue to come from the Greek island of Milos to the Louvre in Paris instead of going to Constantinople. After the Aegean Sea expedition, he planned an expedition with another naval officer of the Pacific Ocean, an area France had been forced out of as a result of the Napoleonic Wars. They set out on their expedition to collect scientific and strategic information in August of 1822 on a ship named originally La Coquille, and sailed to the Falkland Islands, the coast of Peru and Chile in South America, New Guinea, New Zealand, and Australia. The expedition carried out research in the fields of botany and insects, bringing back thousands of specimens to the Natural History Museum in Paris. Then Dumont d'Urville departed on La Coquille, now called l'Astrolabe, or the Astrolabe, named for a navigational device, and sailed in 1826 for a 3-year voyage to New Zealand, Fiji, the Loyalty Islands, New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, Kerguelen Islands, and the Moluccas in eastern Indonesia. In 1837, Dumont d'Urville set out yet again on the Astrolabe for the South Orkney Islands in the Southern Ocean, the Marquesas Islands, Tasmania, along the coast of Antarctica, at which time he claimed land on January 21st of 1840 for France, and he considered it his most significant achievement. He named it Adelie Land after his wife Adele. He also named the Adelie Penguin for his wife. He then sailed on to New Zealand, the Torres Strait, Reunion Island, and St. Helena Island, and returned to France later in 1840. He was promoted to Rear Admiral upon his return, and he wrote a report of the expedition, which was published between 1841 and 1854 in 24 volumes. An interesting side note about Dumont d'Urville's life was his death. He and his entire family were killed in the first ever rail disaster in France in May of 1842, called the Versailles Rail Accident, in which the train's locomotive derailed, the wagons rolled, and the coal tender ended up at the front of the train and caught fire. This was said to be a painting of the incident. Remains said to have been identified as his by a doctor who had been on board the Astrolabe with him were interred here at the Montparnasse Cemetery in Paris. Could this be a case of dead men tell no tales, as it were? Like perhaps explorer Meriwether Lewis, who died of gunshot wounds in 1809. Meriwether Lewis had returned from the Lewis and Clark expedition in 1807, was made governor of Louisiana Territory by Thomas Jefferson, and had made arrangements to publish his Corps of Discovery journals. For a point of information, he was initiated into Freemasonry between 1796 and 1797, from where he was born and raised in Albemarle County, Virginia colony, shortly after he joined the United States Army in 1795. Being governor of the Louisiana Territory didn't work out too well for him for a variety of reasons, and he set out for Washington, D.C. to address financial issues that had arisen as a result of denied payments of drafts he had drawn against the War Department when he was governor, and he carried with him his journals for delivery to his publisher. He decided to go overland to Washington instead of via ship by way of New Orleans, and stayed for the night at a place called Grinder's Stand, southwest of Nashville, Tennessee. Gunshots were heard in the early morning hours, and he was found with multiple gunshot wounds to the head and gut. We are told that Thomas Jefferson and some historians generally accepted Lewis's death as a suicide. His family never accepted that it was suicide, and the matter is still debated. No one was ever charged with his murder, just sharing some strange deaths of famous explorers that are out there and easy to find in the historical narrative we have been given. Also, it is interesting to note there were similar naval expeditions by other countries around the same time as those of Dumont d'Urville for France. The U.S. Exploring Expedition was an exploring and surveying expedition of the Pacific Ocean and the surrounding lands conducted by the United States between 1838 and 1842. The expedition was described as of major importance to the growth of science in the United States, and that during the events of its occurrence, armed conflict between Pacific Islanders and the expedition was common, and dozens of natives were killed, as well as a few Americans. It involved a squadron of 4 ships, with specialists on each, including naturalists, botanists, a mineralogist, a taxidermist, and a philologist, which is someone who studies written and oral histories. It is sometimes referred to as the USXX, or Wilkes Expedition, after the commanding officer, Navy Lieutenant Charles Wilkes. The ships of the Wilkes Expedition departed from Hampton Roads in Virginia for the first stop, the Madeira Islands off the coast of Africa, on August 18th of 1838. The routes of the expedition went something like this, all over the place. The squadron of ships pretty much sailed together at different rates of speed through the whole expedition. They arrived at and discovered Antarctica on January 16th of 1840, which was just a mere 5 days before the completely supposedly different expedition of Dumont d'Urville's claimed land on Antarctica on January 21st of 1840. Then there were the voyages of the HMS Beagle, originally a Cherokee-class 10-gun boat of the British Royal Navy, said to have set off from the Royal Dockland of Woolwich at the River Thames on May 11th of 1820. The HMS Beagle's first voyage was between 1826 and 1830, accompanying the larger ship HMS Adventure on a hydrologic survey of Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego under the overall command of the Australian Navy Captain Philip Parker King. The second voyage of the HMS Beagle between 1831 and 1832 was joined by naturalist Charles Darwin on a second trip to South America and then around the world. Charles Darwin kept a diary of his experiences and rewrote this as a book titled Journal and Remarks, becoming published in 1839 as The Voyage of the Beagle. The third voyage of the HMS Beagle took place between 1837 and 1843 and was a third surveying voyage to Australia, stopping on the way at Tenerife in the Canary Islands, Salvador on the coast of Brazil and Bahia State, and Cape Town in South Africa. I have found all three of these places on the Earth's grid alignments. In Australia, the crew surveyed Western Australia, starting in what is now Perth, to the Fitzroy River, then both shores of the Bass Strait in Australia's southeast corner, then north to the shores of the Arafura Sea across from Timor. Again, all of these places figure prominently on grid alignments. In 1845, the HMS Beagle was refitted as a Coast Guard watch vessel in Essex in the navigable waters beyond the Thames estuary, moored in the middle of the River Roach, until oyster companies and traders petitioned to have it removed in 1851, citing the vessel was obstructing the river and its oyster beds. Just for point of reference, the Crystal Palace exhibition took place in London's Hyde Park between May 1st of 1851 to October 15th of 1851. The Navy list shows that on May 25th of 1851, the Beagle was renamed Southend WV No. 7 at Pagglesham and sold in 1870 to be broken up. Now onto the Kerguelen Islands, also known as the Desolation Islands, and administered as part of the French Southern and Antarctic lands, as mentioned previously. The Kerguelen Islands themselves are considered an exposed part of the Kerguelen Plateau, which is considered a large igneous province, or an extremely large accumulation of igneous rocks, mostly submerged by the southern Indian Ocean. The main island, known as Grande Terre, is 2,577 square miles, or 6,675 kilometers squared. The islands were officially discovered by the French navigator Yves Joseph de Kerguelen-Tremarec on February 12th of 1772. Then, apparently the very next day, a different member of the expedition landed on the island and claimed it for the French crown. The island was visited regularly by whalers and sealers after its discovery, and between the 18th and 20th century, the region's whales and seals were hunted to the point of near extinction. The islands were not completely surveyed until 1840, during the Ross expedition, a voyage of scientific exploration of the Antarctic between 1939 and 1843. This was said to be an engraving from the Ross expedition of Christmas Harbor at Kerguelen Island, from an elevation of 600 feet, or 183 meters. The main base, or so-called capital, of the Kerguelen Islands is at Port-au-Français, on the eastern shore of Grande Terre. This is the best-known feature of the Kerguelen Islands, known as the Arch of Kerguelen at Port Christmas, where there was formerly a geomagnetic station. Apparently, the Arch of Kerguelen actually looked like an arch at one time. Also, what looks to be a version of the same land feature in the Kerguelen Islands, called St. Anne's Finger, on the Galieni Peninsula, on the Baie La Rose, on the top left, is found in the Revillagigedo Islands in the Pacific Ocean near the west coast of Mexico, and part of its Colima province on the top right, and on the bottom left, a feature found in the Galapagos Islands off the coast of Ecuador on the northwestern side of South America, and on the bottom right, one is also found near Yalta on the Crimean Peninsula in the Black Sea. Mount Ross is the highest point of Kerguelen Island at 6,069 feet, or 1,850 meters, also on the Galieni Peninsula. Other land features of Kerguelen Island include Mounts Simone and Diane. George Bedell Airy, whom we saw earlier as the Astronomer Royal, who moved the Earth's prime meridian from the Great Pyramid of Giza to the Royal Observatory of Greenwich in London, organized and equipped 5 expeditions to different parts of the world, of which 3 were sent to the Kerguelen Islands to observe the 1874 transit of Venus. Between 1874 and 1875, altogether British, German, and United States expeditions visited Kerguelen to observe the transit of Venus. The 1874 transit of Venus took place on December 9th of that year, and was the first of the pair of Venus transits which took place in the 19th century, the second one being in 1882. A transit of Venus takes place across the Sun when the planet Venus passes directly between the Sun and a superior planet, becoming visible against the solar disk. Interestingly, this is a diagram of the orbit of Venus as seen from Earth. There is a geomagnetic station at Cap Ratmanoff in the present day, the easternmost point of the Kerguelen Islands. So even today, the principal activities on the islands focus on scientific research, mostly earth sciences and biology, as well as a French satellite and rocket station near Port-au-Français, like what we saw back on Ascension Island, with American and British facilities doing the same thing in the Atlantic Ocean. And there is a small fleet of fishing vessels that are owned out of Reunion Island and licensed to fish in this exclusive economic zone based here. Next on the alignment, we come to Ile St. Paul, or St. Paul Island, another part of the French southern and Antarctic lands mentioned previously. We are told that in 1780, the thin stretch of rock that used to close off the crater of the active volcano it sits on top of collapsed, admitting water through a 330-foot or 100-meter channel. The entrance is shallow, allowing only small ships and boats to enter. For comparison in appearance, on the left is the entrance to what is called the Bassin du Crater, or Lac Crater, or in English, Crater Lake, on the Ile St. Paul in the South Indian Ocean, compared with what is found on the Hawaiian island of Molokai in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. While the Portuguese were first credited with discovering the island in 1559, and the Dutch with sighting it in 1618, the French laid claim to it in 1842, apparently when a group of fishermen from Reunion Island that were interested in setting up a fishery on St. Paul pressed the governor of Reunion to take possession of St. Paul, as well as Amsterdam Island, which we will be coming to next on the alignment. Apparently he did so by official decree on June 8th of 1843. All fishery activities were abandoned in 1853. However, when the French government renounced its possession of the 2 islands, the HMS Marghera, a British troop transport, was wrecked on the Ile St. Paul in 1871, and it took approximately 3 months to rescue all 400 persons that were on board. This was said to be a print of the Ile St. Paul from that time period in 1871. Then in 1892, the crew of the French ship Bourdonnais again took possession for the French government of St. Paul and Amsterdam Islands. These days, the main human activity on Ile St. Paul is a scientific research cabin used for scientific or ecological short campaigns only, and no permanent human population. Other activity involves its importance as a seabird breeding site. The next place we come to on the alignment I am tracking is the Ile Amsterdam, or Amsterdam Island, which was claimed by France in 1892. Amsterdam Island is roughly equidistant from the landmasses of Madagascar, Australia, and Antarctica. While a Spanish explorer by the name of Juan Sebastian de Elcano was said to have sighted the island in 1522, when he was completing the first circumnavigation of the world after Magellan's death in the Philippines in 1522, Amsterdam Island was said to have gotten its name over 100 years later, in 1633, from a Dutch sea captain, Anthony van Diemen, who named it after his ship New Amsterdam, which was named after the Dutch settlement, which later became New York City. Amsterdam Island was a stop for the Macartney mission in 1793, the first British diplomatic mission to China. The goals of the Macartney mission were to 1. Open new ports for British trade in China, 2. The establishment of a permanent embassy in what was then called Peking, now Beijing, 3. The cession of a small island off the coast of China for Britain's use, and 4. The relaxation of trade restrictions on British merchants in Canton in southern China. While it was said to have failed to achieve its initial objectives, the McCartney mission was noted for having brought back extensive cultural, political, and geographical observations that its participants recorded. After having been claimed for France in 1892, the islands were part of the French colony of Madagascar from 1924 until August 6 of 1955, when the French Southern and Antarctic lands were formed. The only settlement on Amsterdam Island is a seasonal research station, which studies biology, meteorology, and geomagnetics. Phylica arbora trees grow on Amsterdam Island. We are told it was called the Great Forest, covering the lowlands of the island, until most of the trees were cleared by fires set by sealers around 1825. Here's a photograph of Lee waves taken on Amsterdam Island. Lee waves are atmospheric stationary waves and are a form of internal gravity wave. It definitely seems as though the location of the islands I have been tracking in the Atlantic and South Indian Oceans are in a favorable location with regards to 1. Trade winds, or the permanent east to west prevailing winds that flow in the Earth's equatorial region between 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south, and which allowed trade routes to become established across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, making various places on the Earth easy or difficult to access. And 2. On the Earth's ocean currents, which are like giant conveyor belts flowing through the ocean and moving huge amounts of water all of the time, and which look very similar to the depiction of the direction of the trade winds. Like George Bedell Airy, another previously seen astronomer royal in this video, Edmund Halley, who was said to have taken possession of the Trindade and Martin Vaz Islands on behalf of the British monarchy in 1700, makes an appearance in history with regard to the subject of the trade winds as well. In addition to being astronomer royal, Edmund Halley was also a geophysicist, mathematician, meteorologist, and physicist. This is a map he made in 1686 of the Earth's trade winds. Note the place names of his time depicted on this map, like the Ethiopic Ocean on the left bottom of the map, Ethiopia prominently displayed in the center of the African continent, Barbaria on the coast of North Africa, Persia, the historic name of Iran, on the top right, and Ceylon on the right middle, the historic name of what is called Sri Lanka today. Pertaining to this place name information, I want to mention that I have long suspected that there was a much greater significance to Ethiopia and what it actually represented in our true history than what we have been told in our official narrative. I'm going to end this video here, and in the next video I will be picking up this alignment in Matara, Sri Lanka, and will be the final video of this particular series based on my findings in tracking a long-distance alignment back in 2020 called the Ancient Advanced Civilization in Sri Lanka, India, and Pakistan.